I think it's just a natural landform. I think it's a natural landform that is part of the edge of the Pleistocene terrace. That is to say, this is at the exact spot where the Vermilion River cuts through the terrace, right, into the floodplain. And if you look at it closely in this contour map, it actually shows a channel cut through on the other side. That is to say, this mound was created, this natural contour was created by that crevasse, or by that channel cut through, by this channel. And there are others like this along the prairie escarpment, or along the terrace edge. In fact, if you look at the maps, you can find some that look just like this. It's not that unusual. Well, that's kind of disappointing. That's kind of a downer. People don't want to hear that. People want to hear about the great Indian mounds that we have in Lafayette. Well, we have to rule that one out. I'm sorry. Not completely, again. We could go look at it, and as someone pointed out to me recently, there could be a site there. As far as we know now, there are no recorded sites there. That is to say, not recorded with the Louisiana Division of Archaeology. Now, what about the Lafayette Airport Indian mounds? What about the Indian mounds? Weren't there Indian mounds there? Well, a little bit more of the irony, yes, there were, but they've all been destroyed. That is to say, there were at least two sites with mounds at the airport or in the vicinity of the airport, and these question marks are not in precisely the correct place, not all of them, but this represents the numbers of sites recorded that have been destroyed at the airport or buried underneath the airport that could be potentially looked at. There are other mounds. In fact, there's a mound right off of Pinhook on one of the side streets going to the Vermilion River that used to be there, that's in a neighborhood that is gone. And you begin to think, isn't that sad? That is to say, the growth of Lafayette required the destruction of Indian mounds, and then we mythologize the past and say, look at this is our Indian mound. That's kind of a downer, isn't it? Well, I think it's important to think about and to realize and to say, why did that happen? Shouldn't we care about it? Because I think it's a lesson that we can learn for the future and that we can carry with us and say, well, shouldn't we care about the places that we still have, places that are still with us, before we have to say, site destroyed by extension of runway at Lafayette Airport, could have been of certain age, we don't know now, it's gone. Sad story, huh? How should we deal with cultural resources in the way of progress? I was talking to someone recently about how progress is often, elevated as if it were purely economic. That progress is something that's going to happen, it's inevitable, we need it to happen. We all like progress, right? It sounds great, it's economic, but we often pit it against cultural resources, or we often pit it against heritage, which from my perspective makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. It seems strange to think about it in those terms. It's really unnatural when we think about it, because it dehumanizes us and makes us say, well, sure, progress is purely economic. In societies that are non-cultural or that don't have any heritage, it doesn't make any sense. Well, here's an example of something that might work out better, not in Acadiana, but another airport, and that is to say, this is some recent news, and there's a more recent news article. This is a news flash. Did you like how the paper flew in? News flash. Macon County in North Carolina, Franklin, North Carolina, is building an airport extension that, in fact, will destroy a Cherokee village site, which is historically documented, and I don't recall the name of the historic name of the village, but was, I believe, 16th, 17th century occupied, back 2,000 years, back to about 1 AD. So a village site of great antiquity with remains of houses, remains, artifacts, including burials, cemetery there. The state got together, the state archaeologists got together with the airport authority to develop it, looked at it and said, well, we should sample this site. That is to say, we should do a little archaeology and do a larger sample than usual, a 25% sample. Usually archaeologists that are interested in looking at a site will only sample, say, 5%, or even less, if they're just interested in learning about the site, getting a little information about the site. In this case, you're talking about the destruction of a site, right? Or total burial of a site, burial of burials, destruction of a cemetery. Well, the Cherokee tribe, Eastern Band, disagreed and said, no, we should have 100% recovery of anything that's going to be destroyed. This is our heritage, and North Carolina should appreciate that, and they should deal with it. I read a more recent article, this is April 9, I read a more recent news article from June where apparently they were at an impasse, but there was a memorandum of agreement written up that said that the entire area, about 5.25 acres, would be stripped and mapped, and that burials would be removed, studied, and that the remains would be reinterred afterwards. This is about heritage, and it's about preserving the past and learning about the past. So how should we deal with cultural resources in the way of progress? You know, again, that mistaken notion that progress is purely economic and that it is opposed to culture and history. We have to really decide, what do we value? Do we just value buying and selling? Do we just value a good home, built well, built sturdily, whether or not it's built on top of graves of people? Or do we want to know something about the past? If so, we could say economic resources are cultural. Economic resources are cultural resources, and cultural resources are economic. There's a relationship there. We might think of it in terms of cultural tourism. We could think about it in other ways as well. That is to say, we should value things that we normally value and develop it as part of progress, that we should make what we value as part of progress, and that we shouldn't use ignorance as an excuse. We shouldn't use ignorance and the ultimate apathy that leads from it as an excuse. They are not progress. We have good examples of this in Louisiana. I don't want to be too harsh. You know, we have excellent examples. Poverty Point, State Historic Site. These other historic sites, state historic sites, if you can make some of these out. In Louisiana, Marksville State Historic Site. There are over 700 recorded mound sites in Louisiana. 2 of them are state historic sites. Most of them are privately owned. Most of these mound sites, Indian mound sites, are privately owned. There is something called the Ancient Mounds Heritage Trail in northeast Louisiana. And this is an excellent way that the state has worked with private landowners to develop an interest in archaeology and an interest in conserving prehistoric mound sites. That is to say, making a trail where people can actually drive. And I brought some of the brochures, and I think Jennifer put them back there, where you can actually drive around and look at mound sites on the landscape, and there are little short summaries in the driving trail pamphlet about what we know about these different mound sites. So we can get a little education and a little interest in the past. Well, now I want to say something about the past. Now I want to actually say something about the people in the past and the sites that they've lived at. There's what's called the Mayfield Clovis Point site. It's a small site, that is to say, what most archaeologists would call an isolated find, which means there is one artifact of a Clovis point. A Clovis point. So 10,000 BC or perhaps earlier, people were living on the banks of the Vermilion River. Comes as a surprise to some people to learn about that. It is not uncommon that a Clovis point is found by itself and that it is an isolated find. In fact, many Clovis points are found as isolated finds, and it's explained that these people are moving vast distances. Frequently, the material, and I think the material from this site or the next site, is actually made out of a chert from central Texas. These people are moving vast distances. We don't think that they were trading with other people to get the material there.